found this passage to be one of the most fantastical and kind of far-fetched in the gospel narrative. You basically have these wise men, these magi, these astrologers, who supposedly see the star rise and travel this great distance and meet with King Herod. And even though it may be rather legendary, there's a lot packed in there symbolically that really gets at the heart of what the faith journey is all about. And I think probably, in its essence, it shows that it is indeed a faith journey. You have these wise men from the East, astrologers, probably from modern-day Iran or Persia once upon a time, and they learn of this birth, of this great king, and so they leave everything. They basically leave their comfort zone and wander through the desert for probably years and seek something. And they're seeking something really, really big, basically this great king, possibly, ruler of the world, and they're going to pay him homage. And so I think that buried in there is that lesson, that idea, that it really is a journey, and you have to be willing to leave your comfort zone. Now, you may not have to travel for years through a desert, but there is some degree to which you have to leave your comfort zone, and you have to be seeking something greater than yourself. So, when I prepare for a sermon, I do something that's called Lectio Divina. I don't know if you've heard of that, but it basically means divine reading. And it's a way of reading Scripture that's not really about sort of like, let me analyze, exactly what this whole passage means in its historical and literary context, but it's really listening for a word that stands out and hits you and captures your imagination. And it's really about wondering, how is God speaking to you through that word? So the word that hit me when I read the passage this time was homage. And I thought, that's a really kind of strange, archaic, medieval word, homage. But it appears a couple of times. And so I thought about, what really is homage? And of course, thanks to Wikipedia, I learned about it. And of course, for those of you who maybe had high school French, it comes from the word for man, homme. So homage was this ceremony in which basically a lower level knight or vassal basically pledged his loyalty to a single lord. And so it really was this political act. And so when the three wise men are saying that they're going to pledge their homage, to this unknown infant who is to be the king of the world, it's a pretty radical political statement. And no wonder that Herod is threatened by this. He knows his scriptures. He knows that there is to be a Messiah, and he knows that he's not it. So this is very threatening to him. And I don't know if any of you remember how the story after this goes. Remember what Herod ends up doing to all the baby boys in Bethlehem? Yes, there's basically this mass slaughter of the innocents. But in any case, it's this revolutionary political act, and these three men think that they're going to be doing that. They're going to be finding something that is uniquely political and a really big deal in world events. But they end up going and finding something that's even bigger than what they thought. And they go, of course, and they find this, squalid scene. And I imagine that at first glance, they see this barn, they see these impoverished peasants, and they see this infant baby who's lying in the feeding trough. And I imagine what they must be thinking. They think, this is it? It's really kind of pathetic. But then there is actually a second gaze. They look again, and they see that in this scene that's sort of universal, right? It's a scene of motherhood and fatherhood, of birth that has just happened. But there's also something peculiarly vulnerable in it. And that is what breaks their heart, and they are aware of the beauty and the holiness and the love that really reveals God to them. Now, this story is known as the Epiphany. And Epiphany in Greek means revelation. And the way that I always remember that is if you can remember once upon a time when cellophane was kind of all the rage, that same root, that phane root, means reveal in Greek. And so basically the Epiphany is when God is revealed or manifested to these three wise men. Now, of course, a sermon of mine wouldn't be complete without a quote from Richard Rohr, and he talks about this idea of the second gaze. That there's sort of a first gaze when you see something and your analytical mind starts judging and analyzing. But there's a second gaze if you're able to train the eyes of your heart, where you are able to look with compassion in the eyes of God. And this is what Richard Rohr says. He says, even after 50 years of practicing contemplation, my immediate response to most situations includes attachment, defensiveness, judgment, control, and analysis. I am better at calculating than contemplating. A good New Year's practice would be to admit that most of us start there, where the false self seems to have the first gaze at almost everything. On my better days, when I am open, undefended, and immediately present, I can sometimes begin with a contemplative mind and heart. Most of the time, I can get there later and even end there, but it is usually a second gaze. I can see why all spiritual traditions insist on some form of daily prayer. Otherwise, we can assume that we will fall right back into the cruise control of the small and personal self-interest of the fragile, smaller self. The first gaze is seldom compassionate. It is too busy asking, how will this affect me? Or how does my self-image demand that I react to this? Or how can I get back in control of this situation? Only after God has taught us how to live undefended can we immediately, or at least more quickly, be present to the other and to the moment. It has taken me much of my life to begin to get to the second gaze. It is well worth waiting for, because only the second gaze sees fully and truthfully. It sees itself, the other, and even God with God's own eyes, the eyes of compassion. So Richard Rohr, I think, is talking about something that probably most of us know all too well. And every once in a while there is this epiphany, there is this breaking through and revelation of how God sees things. And for Epiphany, I usually tell the story of a moment that was particularly revealing for me. It was many years ago. I was with my mentor, Becca Stevens, and we had gone on this mission trip to Ecuador. And we were in this remote area of Ecuador, kind of where there were all sorts of banana plantations, and it was just a really poverty-stricken area. And we were staying with a family, and basically it was in this, it was just sort of a concrete structure with a tin roof, basically, and there was no running water. And we had pretty busy days because we were kind of going about the town, and we were actually doing a lot of painting, and we were also vaccinating animals. We had brought a lot of vaccinations down. And so one night we came back, and we were pretty exhausted, but there was kind of this parade of people that wanted to meet us, from the town. And I'll never forget, because sort of at the end, there were these two, there was a couple, and they were very short. They were probably about 4 feet tall, and we later learned that a lot of this had to do with the malnutrition in the area. So they were very short, and they were with their little boys, who were probably like in 6th grade or so, but looked as if they were 5 years old, also because of malnutrition. And they were, I was sort of the translator the whole time in Spanish, but I was just so exhausted that my mind was not functioning. And I was translating with Becca. We were just sitting on the bed, and I just turned to her and said, Becca, I have no idea what they're saying to us. And she said, sometimes it's okay just to nod. That's just enough. And so we were nodding, and finally she said, your boys are so well behaved. Her kids, which were the same age, were just sort of holy terrors, and she just remarked on this. And then what the woman said next just stunned us. She basically said, that's because they are looking at the Christ in you. And I just remember hearing those words, and it was like tectonic plates in my mind just shifted. And I just realized that there was this irony because they were the ones who revealed Christ to us. And so for me, that was that moment when suddenly I had a second gaze and was able to see with the eyes of God, and there was this mirroring. They saw Christ in us, and we saw Christ in them. And it really just changed my life forever. I came back, and that's kind of when I had the sense that maybe I should be a priest. But anyway, that kind of second gaze is something that changes us forever, or has the potential to. And if you listen to this story again, it says, the wise men returned to their own country by a separate road, by a different road. And I think that's more than just geographic. It just really represents the fact that they are utterly changed and different forever. And the key for us, or the invitation to us, is to take that second gaze into our ordinary daily lives. When we were here for Christmas, we did a candlelight contemplation in lieu of Eucharist, and we basically kneeled in silent adoration of Christ in our lives. And probably a lot of us, were meditating on the beautiful, tender scene of the manger. But the invitation is really to bring that into our ordinary daily lives, so that the God who is hidden right before our noses is revealed and adored. In the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.